Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to a very special edition of Ask of Anything here from DiGiCo HQ. My name is Dan. I am the DiGiCo brand ambassador, and I'm here with some friends, some guests to talk theatre tonight. So we've got an SD10 here in front of me. I've got some software bits we can demonstrate. We've got some technical sort of information about theatre and why and how we do it to go through. So lots of chat, lots of fun. Please have your questions ready. We have behind the scenes a couple of people helping us. Kyle, producer, and Molly answering questions. I don't think we've got Molly on camera tonight, so she's just sort of out the back somewhere typing away. As always, we are doing this from our homes, our offices, so are relying on public internet. So if the stream does go down, stick around the DiGiCo Facebook page and we will be right back with you. So, you know, technical problems aside, hopefully you'll join us for the next hour or so. I'm not presenting this here on my own, so I'm going to hand you over to my partner in crime here, Zach, who is going to introduce the guests and himself. So, hi, Zach.
Hi, hello. I'm Zach Duax, and I work with Autograph A to D. Autograph A to D was kind of put together by our founders, Andrew Bruce, Nigel Olive, and Lou Mead, through the collaboration with DiGiCo in 2003 to build the theater software for the D5. And kind of through that, Andrew had a significant background being a sound designer himself, and working with other console manufacturers, Calrec or Cadac, to build their theater software profiles of the SAM software, and brought that expertise to the DiGiCo theater software. And with me to help talk us through all of these features and functions, we have my friend, I'd like to introduce Nevin Steinberg, sound designer. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and say hi?
Absolutely. I'm Nevin Steinberg, and I'm a sound designer here in quarantine in New York City, and excited to be here as part of this panel. Nice to see you, Zach, and nice to see you, Dan. I design primarily Broadway shows and other large-scale live events, but I'm a live guy, and I do primarily Broadway tours and international productions of Broadway productions as well. Just want to take a moment too to recognize that today is a big day here in the States. It's Juneteenth, June 19th, which is an important day in our history and in Black history, and I'd be remiss to let this continue without just taking a minute to acknowledge that it's a new important day to me. And so I'm no expert on it, but I just want to mention that we're observing that today too.
Yep. Absolutely, thank you, Nevin. Yeah, I'm out of the city right now, but even just across America, we are definitely kind of learning more about ourselves at this time, and really trying to reflect on where we've come from and hopefully where we're heading and going as a nation and as a people. With you and part of your team, we next have Jason Crystal, who's your Nevin associate designer. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been working with Nevin for about a decade now on a long string of Broadway productions, tours, similar list that he just offered. I worked with Julie and Nevin on Tina, the Tina Turner musical. Julie will speak shortly. And my kind of ongoing gig is to supervise the various productions of the currently furloughed musical Hamilton.
Excellent. Thank you. And last but absolutely not least, we have Julie Randolph, who is our engineer and part of the team. Julie, say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. It's really excellent to see all of your faces, even if it's on the screen. I am at least most recently, I was the engineer on Tina, the Tina Turner musical. I'm holding out hope that we will return as soon as we possibly can. And this was my first chance to work with Nevin and Jason and be part of their team. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity. It's been fantastic. I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I have done a giant chunk of my Broadway career on CADX. And other than that, it's been primarily the DiGiCo SD7. So I have spent, a number of years getting familiar with the software and all of that. And I look forward to our discussion here today. Thank you.
Excellent. So Dan, shall we dive into what is the theater software?
Yeah.
Really kind of the first thought kind of thing that comes to mind is, why do we need something special for the theater? What makes this different than your typical live software or the typical sound console layout and design? And even going back into the analog world, why was there always this need for something different for the theater world? And Andrew had really kind of distilled this down to a key set of, I don't want to say hardships, but challenges that as a designer and working in Broadway, we needed to overcome, and was really able to work those functions and distill them into a set of tools that then DiGiCo could lay their hands on and provide solutions to.
Yeah,
and what really motivates all these tools is that in the theater world, and especially when you get into that tech production pre-show work, we really have the problem of, Dan, would you show us our first
slide? Yes.
Yes.
Flip through, if I can find that button. Here we go.
We are motivated because no one waits for sound. So whereas we can overcome these challenges, the software really allows us to do it quickly. As quickly as the show demands, as we're jumping from scene to scene during that production period. I'm sure that this kind of driving force that you can't, no one's going to wait for you. They can't, when they hand you 3 pages of new script, they don't want to hear that you need a half a day to fix it. They want to be able to move forward as quickly as possible.
I mean, if Nevin, Jason, and what's your experience with this? Do you find that you're given a bit of a hard time, and why isn't it done? It's only sound. It should be easy.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think that some of our teams that we've worked with repeatedly over the years understand that when we need time, I ask for it, or my team asks for it, and they're pretty clear. I mean, I think one of the things I get to bring to the table as a sound designer now is the excellent teammates, the excellent members of the team, and so there's a lot of credibility there. I mean, Julie is as experienced an engineer as we have on Broadway, and Jason, is a top-notch associate. And so when either I or they say, I need a minute, there's a lot of respect given to that. But there's no harm to being able to work quickly, certainly, and a smooth workflow, getting things into the show, particularly things that are just simple, not simple, things that are not particularly about how it's going to sound, just kind of like the workflow stuff that just needs to be about organization, and those things do need to be fast. And because it actually, even more than it lets everyone else keep working, it lets us keep working, right? It allows us to keep concentrating on the thing we really want to concentrate on, is how's the show going to sound.
Yeah.
The thing I would add to that is also it gives us the ability to triage things we need to do. So in real time, as you're taking through the show, the list of things we say, oh, we'll do that on the next break, or we'll do that in the work call, that list gets much smaller if we can just do it quickly in the moment. So it also just saves us time on the back end later.
Cool. And are you working alongside mixers with an offline workstation to achieve those things?
Often during tech, I'm often back with the engineer working on the desk at the same time, sometimes with a remote 007, sometimes on a PC. Nevin often has an iPad. So we're often kind of attacking the console from multiple locations and multiple devices. But I spend probably most of my time back at the console proper.
Cool.
Julie just wanders off half the time. I don't know what she's doing. just hope she remembers what she did.
Cool. Right. So Zach, should we have a look at the first feature? And do you want to have a talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first feature and first kind of challenge that we need to deal is this pertains particularly to Julie, is we follow every line of the script. We're mixing every line. We're mixing every line of dialogue. We're transitioning from a musical number right into a book scene, and vice versa. And because you're so busy dealing with the line-by-line mixing, you don't have a lot of time for making little adjustments along the way. So part of being a digital console is you want to be able to store those changes. And one of the things that was really holding back digital consoles on Broadway particularly, I mean, even in 2003, 2000, all the way up to 2005, really, I would say, our main challenge and main competitor was the CADAC. The majority of Broadway shows are still running on CADAC at that point. And part of that is that analog feel and the ability to be fast on an analog console, where you went up and you changed an EQ knob, you made that fix you needed to make, and you just didn't have to think about it after that. Where with digital, where you're storing, updating. So the solution that DiGiCo came up for us is the auto update tracking. So this, we could set the parameter on a desk, say your fader level or your EQ level, so that when you make that change, it would auto update not just to the snapshot that you're in, but then ripple up and down your cue list, and then it would have the behavior of an analog desk. So you're able to be very quick, reach, make a change, and have that be applied to your entire cue list in time. And Dan, would you like to maybe give a little demo of?
Absolutely. So I've got a little session here with 10 cues, and you'll see if I use my mouse actually here, we can demonstrate it. The auto update is switched on, and essentially the console is going to constantly write data to whatever cue you're in. So in many respects, as Zach said, this behaves a bit like an analog console, or very much like an analog console. So if I switch screens here and we look at some channels, I've got the left-hand channel selected, and if I put the EQ on, you'll see it appear, and I can dial in something sort of nice and obvious. And you can see on the right-hand side of my screen here, I do have a little cue list, so you can see what's going on. So if I fire up and down my cue list, you'll see the cues changing. And if I continuously make EQ adjustments as I'm firing up and down, you can see that the EQ just stays wherever I put it. So it is automatically writing all that data to all the cues. So very much, like an analog console. The clever bit comes in how we control where we use that data.
Right.
Is it for all cues? Is it for some of the cues? But the basic principle here, from a speed point of view, is we are replicating an analog console, and that's really all there is to the auto update thing in its basic form.
Yep, but then we are using a digital console, so we want to have all the benefits of a digital console. So
Absolutely.
Then we need to have it recall something special when we come to that special moment, and that's where we get to the option function, where if you are then in a particular scene where you want to recall a specific EQ just for that scene and have that scene stored and not be overwritten as you're going through and making your EQ changes for what would be your typical EQ, you would hold the option button and you can very quickly set that EQ change just for that one cue that you're in.
So if I take the cue I'm in, Q5, hold the option all button, and you'll see on the bottom left hand of the screen there is a indicator to show you that it's on. And if I make some changes to the EQ, change every band and do something different, in Q5 we now have a different EQ. The other cues all have the same automatically updating EQ, and Q5 has a different one. So precise control over EQs, AUXs on a per cue basis, either globally across the entire show automatically or for special events.
Right.
So I'll throw this out to our panel actually.
Okay.
Auto update. Does it live on, switched on? I mean, Julie, you mix. Is it something that it just stays on and you mix, or do you have a bit more of a complicated workflow? That defines it.
For me, auto update is always on. I've had some rather spirited exchanges with some other mixers about their philosophy about that. But for me, it is always on. And I guess the end part of that is that when I'm making changes, once the show is open, sorry, Nevin, once the show is open, if I want to make a change and save it, I don't do it at the end of the show because I have had auto update on. I have been making changes. We've had a clarinet sub in and I've adjusted their fader or, whatever it is. But auto update makes it possible for me to be in the moment with the show, mix the show, and make the show sound right in the moment. And then I can go back at the end and save a change later, but not in that same show file.
All right. Kind of Jason and Nevin, as you were talking about how either Jason, you're standing at the console with Julie during the tech process, or Nevin, you're on an iPad or a workstation. How do you communicate when something needs to be auto updated on or off? Is that is there like a system that you follow, or a kind of Go ahead, Nevin.
I got it. I mean, I just, because I can, I sort of presume almost always that auto update is on. That's sort of my baseline, is because I'm working remotely, so I can't keep checking. So I think as team, we sort of have a policy that auto update is on unless somebody shouts literally auto update is off, or we're making a big change to a whole cue list, which means hot desk, which means everybody hands off faders, hands off knobs, because, as I used to say about the SAM software, when it started to have updatable functions and rippleable memory functions in the digital software, it's a very powerful tool, but so it must be treated with great respect, right? Like you can really do some incredible damage very quickly if you don't know what state you're in. But the default state for me, being a remote player, is that auto update's on. So if I make a change, I assume it's rippling through the whole cue list, and I will say that I'm going to noodle with something I don't want to save it, and I'll ask auto update off, or we'll figure out some way to do that. But most of the time, it's just on. And Jason's usually, as he said, back with Julie, kind of mediating that conversation.
I mean, I find that it's a big leap of faith for a lot of people who have done analog where they haven't got to worry about it, and they come to digital and then they're very scene based. Oh my God, what am I storing? And then this big sort of trust moment of when I, in training, might say to someone, look, put auto update on, leave it on, leave all your scopes enabled, and it will just remember everything. And it is a big thing. And I think some of the complicated workflows we end up with are because people are a little bit scared of it. But it's nice to hear that you have to have the trust in it just to do what it says on the tin.
That comes partly from the history, having some history with it, right? And also recognizing that the big leap with things like auto update and this theater idea, this theater software, was that you're basically taking a console that was built on a platform which was a snapshot console. That's what's in its DNA, and basically telling it to stop doing that. Yeah. Right? You're saying, okay, don't do the thing that you were built to do. Do this other thing. And we have to sort of I always keep that in the back of my mind. That transition was a rocky one for those of us who were there for it. But it's a good thing to remember. It's like, oh, the desk is meant to be, change something, store something. But what we've done is we've kind of pulled those wires out and said, no, you don't have to do that. Yeah.
And Nevin, I remember early on in the D5 days how you guys have the flip cards of auto update on, auto update off that you would put up on the desk. Especially in D5, I think, Jason, you worked on D5 as well, that was, you had to make sure everyone was aware. Absolutely.
Yeah. And when SD came along, when SD7T came along, we took everything we'd learned from D5 and, sat down and had the opportunity to actually, have another go at doing it better. And, for the most part, I think, it does okay. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is very powerful that Julie gets to choose, as it's one thing in production, right? We're talking about, you're describing a production scenario, but Julie was hinting at the power of that tool in terms of maintenance and the long-term health of a production, which of course is something we on Broadway and in the theater will deal with. These shows can run, God willing, they run forever, but they'll run for, weeks, months, years. And we need that. We need the engineer to have all the tools available to be able to create a healthy production over the long term, not just in production.
Yeah, I'm guessing, change of mixes over a lifetime of a show, handing on of show files, all of those things become a bit of a pain. I mean, taking on someone else's show file at the best of times is never easy. But the added complication of a big theatre production must make it hard.
Yep.
Yeah, and not to mention multiple productions of the same show. That becomes an interesting challenge too, where we're taking something that was created in one market and taking the same show and moving it to a different market, and how to retain as much of the information that we want and filter out the information that's going to be new. And that's a very delicate dance. Yeah.
And the one thing I'll add with regards to the rippling and auto update, and I know we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this, is that you get to pick which parameters you're dealing with. And that's something that I'll often discuss with the engineer right from the get-go. On the D5, you didn't get to pick, and on the SD7, you do. And as a result, that's going to ripple through to every company forever. And those initial decisions about what parameters are inverted or excluded are really important, because while we were just demonstrating that changing the EQ, you may want to do the whole show. My guess is if you mute a channel, you don't want it muted the whole show, typically. And so those conversations happen right at the get-go and speak to the workflow.
Absolutely. And those are all set under the option page. Your theater tab is where you set what do you want to have update. What do you want to have update just per snapshot?
Shall I bring that up so we can? Oh, there we go.
There it is.
There it is on screen.
They use that word auto update exclusions, which sometimes can be a little bit confusing because you're not excluding it from updating it. You're excluding it just from the ripple portion.
So, I think of it as inversion. So whether something is auto updating the whole show or auto updating in only this queue, that's what you're choosing between.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in both instances, it will automatically save. I mean, this whole thing of, stopping people pressing the store button the whole time, trust it, program it right, and it will do what you say. Should we have a quick look at the next one, because it's sort of related, Zach?
Absolutely.
The no time for cue list management.
Yeah, and that's part of that moving quickly is we don't have time to going through each individual queue and figure out what we want to have recalled, what needs to ripple up and down, going through each parameter and setting those. So we have the one global scope, which we can set up.
Yeah, so if I bring the global scope.
Yeah. So as you see here, everything is check marked except for the control groups, which is Julie's job. So we allow her to have control of those. And then that's it. Then we use the option page to dictate the behavior. And then we allow and trust in the software and auto update to ripple up and down all those parameters.
Yeah. I will point out one thing on here, actually, if you use my mouse. The control group's not recalling. I do get questions from people asking how we change membership if we're not recalling control groups. Of course, this is fader and mute position, not membership. So if people are out there watching, wondering, how we change control groups if we're not recalling them, it's the fader and mute position only. As you say, that's Julie's creative influence in putting the faders in the right positions.
The other thing I'll add about this window is it's important to remember that this overrides auto update or anything else you would do on the console. So if something is not in scope for update, auto update won't update it. If something's not in scope for recall, you won't recall it when you hit a queue. This is, I guess, legacy in the sense that this exists whether there's T software or not, and it always wins. So we tend to default toward a lot of check marks because then we let auto update based on the logic we decide, update or not update.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will point out there is another scope, another auto update scope that allows you per parameter, per queue, per channel selection. On one hand, you might go, that's really great. It's really powerful, and it is. But you can very quickly overcomplicate or forget what you've done in these things, and it will record and update and do what you tell it to do. And if you've varied don't auto update the EQ for Lorraine on one queue only, you could get yourself in a real mess.
Right.
So I generally try and advise people to steer clear of that and stick, as we're going to keep talking about the general auto update, just taking care of things. It does, and hopefully we can demonstrate that over the course of the next, half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yep. And just kind of speaking to that, no time for console management. Also, we didn't have this tool to kind of blend it. Let's go to the next one, because we'll come in. Yeah.
What do we have next?
Yeah. We'll talk about queue management.
There we go. Sorry, I found the right button.
Oh yeah, programming shortcuts and control group queues. This is the backbone of your programming. Is your control group members, and this is all set up through the control group queues panel, which is an overlay on top of the live software. So, word of warning: nobody under any circumstances, if you're using the theater software, use the live join, leave, fader control group option from the actual channel strip, because that will bypass the control group queues page, and that information will no longer follow the theater software rules.
Yeah. So
all of your control group members and control group assignments is all done through this page. And now I believe in later software, we now default with auto mute on control groups is on.
Yep,
which
absolutely.
was always a big note at the beginning, is to make sure that auto mute is turned on.
Down here in the bottom left-hand corner, the red auto mute is switched on by default now, yes, which wasn't always the case.
Which this saves a lot of time in programming. It's a great shortcut where if a input channel joins a control group, it is then automatically unmuted. And if it leaves that control group, it automatically mutes for you. So as you bring in channels and drop them into your CG assignments, you can have confidence that when you bring up that fader, they will be open. And then if they leave, they will automatically mute, so you don't have an onstage mic sitting open somewhere when it leaves the control group.
So I do a quick demo of the panel, and then we can go to the crew and ask them about their uses of it. So this is the panel, and this is, I think, as close to sort of an Excel spreadsheet style programming interface that we have for this. And as Zach says, it's, I think, one of the big key features that differentiate it from live software. So down the left hand side is a list of queues, and across are your VCAs, your control groups. And each of these cells will contain the membership for the given control group and the given queue. The one big feature, and I guess we'll talk in a minute maybe where this came from, but this ripple function that we keep talking about allows us very quickly, I think, to work from the top of the show down and allocate channels into control groups. So I'm going to use the right click to clear these out, and you'll see them on screen just empty out. And I'm going to work from here with control group 1, Q1, and I can come down to this lower panel, which you see at the bottom, and along here are my channels off the channel strips. So I could say in control group 1, Q1, I want Dan, and he's on stage for 2 Qs, and then he comes off. In Q2, he's joined by Zach, who, and various people along here. So we can very quickly build a visual map of what's under each fader at any given cue. The ripple function populates the show downwards to the end. So if we work from the top doing populate and clears, we can see these assignments. Again, I'm not pressing the auto update button. The system just automatically writes all this data. So all I have to do to get the assignments that I've done on here is fire the queue I'm in, and those assignments are written. So it's a really quick spreadsheet style visual interface for mapping out, I guess, is the best description of your control group members. Did I miss anything?
I think the only thing I would point out as well is the sets.
Okay, yeah.
Because that becomes a big step, because you usually have groups of characters that are then performing together, whether it's a choir, whether it's dancers, or soldiers, any one of those.
So we can predefine sets of channels. So we could come in here and say we're going to have a set called boys. And then with boys selected, we can pick all the male characters off the channel list. If we were to have a second one that was girls, I would quickly type this in. We select girls and we pick the girl sets, girl channels. If I go back to my control group cues panel, let's just make some clears here. If I come to a cue, you can see I've got my channels along the bottom section, but my sets. So when I pick boys, it pre-selects the right number of channels. I can then, like a spreadsheet, hold the shift button, remove people from it, make amendments, edit it. But the sets gives us a really quick shortcut into programming our VCAs.
Yeah. And I believe this is something that comes directly from the SAM software. It's pretty much the backbone, and so hopefully it was really familiar to all of you when you're coming over from CADX to DiGiCo. This was something that was comfortable, and I know it's been cleaned up quite a bit now in SD7, and when it first was with our bolted-on offline editor. But this is one of the kind of backbone tools of the theater software that allows your programming, and to allow when you get a new set of, in this example of getting script changes, it allows you to quickly look at that script changes. Okay, we need these characters on stage. And even while, say, Julie is still mixing a rehearsal, Jason or Nevin can step on the offline software and do this programming ahead of time.
I'll jump in for a second and say, I was going to jump in and say, typically we would both prefer, and so would the engineer, to handle the control cues page almost exclusively, both for our safety and theirs. So I guess I'd be curious what Julie's programming philosophy is on that page.
I very much appreciate that you guys sort of let me do what I will with that. The sets are super helpful, but just the simplicity in which this part of the programming is laid out makes it possible for me to get like a couple of script pages that have been changed, or in some cases not get the script pages but follow what's been happening on stage, and I can reprogram that whole scene while they're still writing the lighting cues, because the software is simple, because, as again you mentioned in the beginning, nobody waits for sound.
Yeah.
And when you start a show, do you sit with a script and a spreadsheet and try and map these things beforehand, or are these things which, once you hit rehearsals and tech production, time, you then start building them? I mean, how much foresight do you have in experience and what you're going to want to put under fader control when you start a new script?
I think that every show is different, and I have come to learn that, for example, on the West End, they tend to have the mixers in the rehearsal studio ahead of time. So frequently, when your engineer is hitting the theater with the actors, at that point, they're basically off book. We don't have a similar situation here. So it just depends on how much advance time you get with the script. Sometimes you're doing it, setting up these programming choices in the shop. Sometimes you're really doing it in the theater. But as Jason alluded to earlier, you're making some very specific choices about your parameters from the very beginning. Like, basically, you have to write Q1 exactly as you want it, because you really can incorporate a lot of mistakes later on if you don't do that.
Yeah. In fact, we've got a document we wrote with various people's help all about making Q1. And at the end of this presentation, we've got a QR code link that will take you to a set of files which include our how to make Q1 document. It is a super important process for a whole bunch of reasons, sort of buried in the software, that, if you're going to hand the show file on to someone else later down the line, the more you can do before you create Q1, the tidier the show file is going to be at the end of the day. And I think that makes a big difference for the longevity of a show file, and not having to, Jason, have to rebuild it because it's all a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
I would add also, one of the things that's kind of hidden in the power of this feature is that because I know that we have this level of resolution in the programming, right, as a designer, it means that I can then essentially, I have blue sky in terms of what I can ask for in terms of the what's coming out of the console, meaning how things are organized. So if I want, so there's no really, like, it really opens up the number of cues, for example, that a show can have, right? Because this is so fast and so well organized and so granular, like as you just demonstrated with, a set of an ensemble members, and you can just pull one person out and put them in so quickly into another fader and have that control. It really allows me to, as a designer and my team, to say, add a cue, because there's really no obstacle to that. Where in the old days there was, it was arduous to have to manage those memberships and to manage a cue list. And because of this feature, which is, did come over from Sam and was an eye opener then and continues to be, we've just incorporated this idea that's just, add a cue, do this, because there's no friction involved in that, really. And that's a great thing. It also means too that, the organization of the control groups and the organization of how the desk is bringing information to the engineer is, I have great confidence in it. Right, because I know the tool is good. I know how the tool works. I know that Julie can wrestle it into the way she wants it, and that if there's something that isn't behaving, it's easily changed to continue to refine it and make it easier to mix and better. And so there's a great deal of it's very reassuring to work with the software in that respect as someone who's responsible for what's coming out of the sound system, because I know on the input side, there's a good set of tools there.
But do you think then that the number of features and these sort of tools have changed the way your design approach works, because now there are more possibilities? It's easier for these guys to implement your vision.
Yeah. I think
so your awareness of what is possible is paramount in trying to deliver something which is maybe technically more challenging or different.
Yeah, I think we all share that sort of sense that, I don't think we think about it that way necessarily anymore. Like, I think it's just part of the workflow for those of us who have been using this desk for a long time, that we know, it's one of my favorite things to do as a designer is ask for something that I know is going to be a little bit tricky to figure out. But the truth, because that's what makes it fun, right? To see, can we do this? Can this be accomplished? And then it's a question of, do we have an idea about how to accomplish it? And then do we have the tools to accomplish it? And this is definitely a big part of our ability to do that.
Excellent. Which actually, talking of tools, the next point, Zach.
Yeah.
And actually, this is one which has, various different uses from various different people. If we flip over, it was one of those extension things from D5, when we rebuilt it as SD theatre software. Some of the things that people wanted us to do in the past now became possible. And I think certainly this is one of those things,
right, setting up aliases.
Yeah, aliases and the flexibility of them certainly makes a big difference.
I mean, that was always one of the challenges that using a digital console is really kind of meant to solve, because you can have these libraries of different EQs or different situations on a mic that with an alias, I can now take one channel strip and then have built within the programming of that channel strip linked together a number of cues. So if we keep returning to a same state, say the state of hat on versus the state of hat off, you could build an alias for that hat. So then within that alias of hat on, any sort of update you would make would then update that EQ of the hat. And then with the SD7 and SD software, really getting into what that alias does really opened up what they're used for. So now you can actually create which module are inheriting the information from the entire cue list, or what modules are then individual and unique to the alias itself. So it could be something along the lines of an aux send. So you can have certain states, which would be alias states of, say, fullback downstage versus fullback upstage, that you really kind of gets into a complicated set of states that your actors move through. The aliases then solve for us.
Absolutely. Shall I have a go at demonstrating this live?
Yes.
So I'm going to pick some channels here, and I'm going to take this Harry channel. And currently, Harry is in a totally flat state. So if I go up and down the cue list, you'll see that there aren't any changes. And we're going to use EQ again because it's nice and easy to see. And I'm going to put in something nice and big. And as I fire on the cue list, you can see that it doesn't change. So if we go to Q4, I'm going to come into my aliases panel. And here I can create the new alias. So I'm going to press the new button and give it a new name, Harry in a Hat. But before I do that, I can choose what the separation is between the original channel and the new alias channel, Harry in a Hat. Which elements of the channel need to be different from the original one to this new one. So I'm going to leave the filters, dynamics, and EQs in place as it stands. But you can see here, from inserts, aux sends, faders, panners, groups, any element of the channel can be isolated and moved off to a duplicate sort of use of the channel. So Q4, Harry has a hat on, and we're in Q4. So I'm going to just change the EQ so you can all see something different. If I go back to Q3, you can see the original Harry channel EQ exists, and if I go to Q4, the new Harry in a Hat EQ appears. End of the show, Harry comes back on stage in a hat, so all I have to do is come into here and choose the Harry Hat alias, and I have all of the settings associated with Harry wearing a hat. So this is sort of our normal standard sort of demonstration of the feature. Any part of the channel can be isolated. You could reuse the entire channel, and essentially, someone doesn't reappear in Act 2, so you could reuse the channel in Act 2 for another use. I've seen it used for effects returns off reverbs. There's lots of ways to do it, but the idea is you can have different versions of a channel and recall them at any point in time.
I would like to point out there that it's important to not create multiple aliases within the same cue, because as each alias will refer back to that first instance of the alias, if you have multiple aliases within a cue, they'll all refer back to the same cue. So the kind of workflow of creating an alias is you create the first time that it is used. So there's kind of this, I think, I'm not sure. Some people have a work philosophy where they want to kind of create all their buckets first. So they'll create all of their aliases while sitting in just having Q1. And for that kind of creates some problems. So just a workflow is when the first time you need the alias, build it in that queue. And then all of the aliases, every time you assign the alias, it will refer back to that first instance of the alias, which is an important note.
How much?
I think the other useful thing I was just going to add is that once you create an alias, it appears in control group queues. So when you come back later in the show and he puts the hat back on, rather than navigating through the channel strip, if Julie is programming ahead in her scripts and needs to create a queue and knows we need to use that alias that we used before, now that alias appears as an option for that channel strip. So instead of choosing Harry when programming that particular control group, Harry hat is right there, and you don't have to bother jumping over to the control strip and then reprogramming it.
Absolutely. Kyle, I've just brought that up on screen, actually. So we can see in this bottom section where I pick my channels, channel 2, Harry hat, and underneath Harry. And it here would list the aliases that exist for the channel. If an alias is in this list and it's red, it means the alias exists but is not actually used anywhere in the show. So it's a great place to come and do that multiple programming steps in one place.
And Dan, also point out the buttons on the bottom left corner of the control group queues, which are very important for
all
this
settings
part.
Or CG membership
CG
only.
Yep.
So normally when you assign in a control group, it is essentially assigning the alias at the same time, which means by default it potentially could bring in channel settings, EQs, settings associated with the channel. If you change this selection to the CG members only, you are not going to affect channel settings, EQs, aux, etc., and you are only going to affect the fader module, which is the bit that contains control group membership.
Great.
That was one of those features that actually came about, someone had a bit of a weird programming workflow and they'd done a bunch of optionals, I think, exclusions, and then they programmed all their aliases using this panel and it overwrote some bits. So it's really down to what order you do some of your programming in.
Yeah.
And Zach and Dan, is it worth pointing out to the one other thing to remind people about the aliases, which I think is incredibly powerful, is that once the alias is in the queue list, say regarding EQ that you were demonstrating, it behaves exactly in auto update as the original EQ, meaning
Absolutely.
that if you change the alias EQ in queue 250, that alias EQ ripples up and down the queue list only for the alias where it appears, in the same way that the vanilla EQ that we started with will also ripple up and down.
Absolutely. So
pretty cool thing.
If we look at this channel again, I'm in the Harry hat, so I'm going to dial in my filters to make it really, really obvious. And we can flip between our hat and our normal vanilla EQ for Harry. If I go back up to the queue where he was in a hat, there it was, you can see that automatic change that I made in Q10 is reflected in Q4 without us having to do anything. So, as you tweak and adjust, either through rehearsals or someone comes on a performance and something isn't quite right, you can tweak it knowing that when you fire the next cue, that fix is still in place, for whenever they play on the show. So cool.
Yeah. And then I think our last little feature, players, and then
Yeah. Before I do this one,
understudies.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that people have been asking for. Does it get used in your shows, guys? Hamilton and Tina, and was this the sort of feature that you were using? Yeah.
Yeah, Julie.
Yeah. This is Julie's feature.
Yeah.
We kind of live and die by the players because it's such a great fix for example, in Tina, we have two primary ladies who share the role, and one does 6 a week, one does 2 a week, and they have very different settings. So to be able to attach all of their settings to the player, and then you select your players at the, at your preset, you're not having to make changes all the time. It's really, really handy. And also it's very helpful for your band subs as well. You get different musicians in, and they need some different settings as well. And it's just, I love the players. It's super helpful.
Because that's almost every day you have someone is subbing out, either through the band or your cast. It's an everyday
definitely
thing. Yeah.
What did you do before? Preset libraries and other sort of complicated mechanisms to make it work?
Yes, notepads.
Old school.
Aliases with some lesser success. Yeah. It just fixes it.
Yeah. Shall I give it a go at trying to demonstrate this? So we have a panel for players, which allows us to manage it. To begin with, it looks like we don't have any players. So our default state for all the channels, our principals, our chorus, is that there aren't really any players. And it's only when we start introducing the players that we're going to start making these differentiations between what one person sounds like and another. So I'm going to use the Harry Hat channel to demonstrate this, and I'm going to press the new button, and it's going to give me a warning to start with. And this is because once we set down this road and we start making players, we can't modify the relationship between the players. So we have to just think carefully about what, in reality, are the differences between, me playing a role and Zach playing a role. We sound different, so is it our EQs and our dynamics that are different? Do we want different aux sends? By default, I'm just going to leave it in our filters, EQ, dynamics. That's our personal settings that sort of affect the shape of our sound, if you like. So this will be Dan playing Harry. And at the moment, nothing's changed because I've only got one player playing this role. So if we look at the channels, actually, at the moment, it's exactly as it used to be. With our two aliases and the same structure. If I now come in and Zach is going to play Harry, nothing's immediately changed, but if I select Zach to be the current player and just fire a cue again, what we can now do on the channel level is just with automatic multi-updates still enabled, we can, for each of the aliases, each of the cues, we can make some changes. So I'll do something just to try and demonstrate a different vanilla EQ for Zach's version of Harry, and I can go down and get to the Harry Hat, and again make some changes, something really obvious so you can see it. And as I fire down the show, this channel on, you will see that the two EQs are automatically stored for Zach's version of Harry. If I come back and make me the player, I'm now back to my original versions of the channel with my hat and without a hat. So you can have, lots of different players per role. You can copy settings and move settings between players. As Julie said, see this used a lot for depping musicians in a band. Or if you've got, a young cast that can't do many shows, swapping from, cast A to cast B using sets of players, predefined groups of players. Lots of possibilities.
Wow, I didn't even know there was groups of players. That's exciting.
So these sets allow you to. We could have, for example, cast A and cast B.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then if you can
think of the drum kit options.
You can assign them into each channel or player. You can assign into set A, set B, and then you can just record them in big groups of channels.
That's awesome.
So on the face of it, it looks really simple. And, I think the challenge from our point of view was all the time spent scratching our heads as to how we make this usable. It's all very well having a great tool, but if in the heat of battle you don't have the time to wrestle the commands, then there's no point having it.
I think that's something that we've really worked out over, the decade and a half, almost 2 decades now of building theater software. Really we've made a lot of changes in that time and continue to make it better and refine those tools and the ability to implement them.
Yeah.
And the last little one I wanted to point out before we move on is the our lovely channel cues page, which is layout channel cues. Yeah. So at the end of a programming show, we usually end up with 100 plus, if not hundreds, of cues in a typical show, and just general kind of managing all that information is quite difficult. And the channel cues page.
Actually, I think my channel cues page is off screen. I've got a bit of a weird monitor set up here. So I've got to module cues, which is sort of a similar thing, but
less useful.
Inverted, but it will give the same sort of idea, I guess.
Right. It gives you this page gives you a spreadsheet layout of all the programming per cue, what every module is doing. So if you ever get to an instant where you step into a queue and something happens, this is a very kind of easy way to go in and figure out what was that, what happened in our programming.
Yeah.
What do we need to do?
And in fact, we can see here, if we look at some of the data behind it, this is Harry's channel. And we're in Q10 where he was wearing a hat. So you can see here, there are 2 versions of the EQ. There's the Harry, I've got a hat on EQ, and there's the vanilla Harry, I don't have a hat on EQ. So the ability to, on a per cue basis, look at the data, maybe correct mistakes where you've accidentally written some, erroneous data, copy data between channels, different cues. This is the place to do it.
Yep. And
so
I think
Nevin, Jason, Julie, anything big from a theatre point of view you think we've missed in talking about the consoles?
Number of outputs was a big thing when the theater software first came out, I remember. But it's now we've just gotten used to it, right? Like there's the expanded matrix, which was a big deal because we tend to use higher output counts than what the desks were originally designed for, and that was a big accommodation that made a big change in our lives. But I think now we just assume that those matrices are big. So
and talking about the matrix, do you use the onboard delays on the matrix for odds, or do you do a lot of that work externally? One of the features of theatre that's different to live, and it's the sort of the only processing feature, I suppose, that's different between live and theatre, is the fact that we have nodal delays. Each of these crosspoint nodes has an individual delay on it. But is this something you use or not?
For me, very rarely to date have I used it. I think there have been a couple of places where it's come in pretty handy, but it's not something I've relied on yet. Not for lack of desire, just I think lack of getting used to it as being part of my workflow. But,
I think certainly, this software, we're doing it on an SD10 today, but whether it's SD7, Quantum 7, SD9, these features are the same across the board. And I think sometimes when I see productions done on smaller consoles, taking pro theatre features and doing it on a small work surface, it's things like this, the matrix delays, where maybe there isn't budget for doing it in another way, can help the designers and the mixers, achieve what
Jason,
they achieve.
Have you done any of this on your own projects? Have you done any?
Yeah, a little bit on the smaller shows. As was alluded to, it's often useful when you don't have powerful outboard processing.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have this giant matrix with some of the capabilities of a proper speaker processor, and in those kind of smaller situations, it can be quite useful.
Absolutely. We've had a question through, actually, and I'm just going to put it out there, and anybody can jump in and have a go. So I'm just going to read this out. From James Morris. How do you guys go about changes to band orchestra settings, such as effects, etc., for a particular song without affecting your cues and VCA assignments for your mics. So yeah, changes to band and orchestra for particular songs without ruining other things.
I can start, and then if someone wants to jump in. I mean, so initially, the great thing is I think we would typically start with a cue for the song, and if there are songs within the song, we may add additional cues. But it's very easy to start with a single cue for a song. And when you realize, oh, we need to change the band in some way partway through the song, creating a new cue when you're sitting in a cue is transparent. It doesn't affect the sound because the new cue will have the state of the cue you're already sitting in. So when you're like, in this particular cue, we need to mute the brass section, you simply hit new cue and mute the brass section. There's nothing else to do. So I guess that would be the fast answer is just make another cue and it'll just maintain its previous settings. We also didn't really dive into relative groups, which is another theater software feature, but that is another mechanism by which you can move the band in terms of its mix over a wide group of cues without affecting the rest of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll bring it up just quickly for those that don't see it. We have the ability to create groups of cues. So, what we're talking about here is making multiple cues for a song, and then once you're into that little group of cues for a song, being able to make relative fader changes and have those relative changes written just across the group of cues that represent a single musical number. The problem we have at the moment, and it is a sort of at the moment problem, is that affects the entire desk. The cue group and therefore relative fader functions is something which is across the entire board. Something we're looking to change for the future and improve, but certainly, for big musical numbers that have lots of cues and need that flexibility of being able to mix within a song, relative cue groups are, one way of achieving it, certainly.
We're also not averse to using, sorry, go ahead, Julie.
No, please.
No, I mean, I think edit range and, is also, right, Julie? I mean, don't you agree? Like I like positive action. So as much as I love auto update where you can make a change and know that it's stuck, there's also something very satisfying to saying, I'm going to take these cues and I'm going to change the electric bass level to this level for these 4 cues. And you can do that as you would in any digital desk by selecting a group of cues, making a change to only the thing you want to change, and then essentially confirming that change. So in some ways you get the best of both worlds, right? Like just because you have auto update, which is incredibly powerful and must be treated with great respect, there's also sort of the stuff that's just in the DNA of the desk, which is these snapshots gets this change.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want that to stick, and that's a good thing to always keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I always teach, when I'm trying to do this, I always start with the let's deal with auto update, but pick a workflow and stick to it. Have a method to your madness, as it were. Do what
and that's so rigid.
I remember the early days, one of the first SD70s that did Billy Elliot in Chicago, and I spent 10 days cleaning up a session out there because it had been programmed in an odd way, and it wasn't that it didn't work, but I think there's part of me that didn't like the mess, and I spent a lot of time cleaning it up. But having a workflow, pick what you're going to do, stick to it, try it, modify it when you need to, but have some method to it is always my advice, because as you say, it's big and powerful and will bite you if you let it.
Jason does a lot of cleaning up after the like there's the Q data and stuff like that. I mean, it's a big part of Jason's job is actually tidying some of the mess we make when we get impulsive and excited about making a change. We will do it. But later, Jason always has in the back of the mind, what if we have to do it again? what if we have to recreate this? What's the best way to get this to be part of the legacy of what we're doing, so that it's easily found later, it's easily documented, it's easily reproduced, and thank goodness, Jason's kind of always thinking in the back of his mind about how he's going to kind of tidy up the mess we've made later.
Yeah. Another question, this one's for Julie, from Philip Allen. It says, can you elaborate about the process for saving daily changes or not saving them? You mentioned early on about making changes and choosing whether or not to save them. So
yeah, generally speaking, the teams that I've worked with in the past, including this team, during production, during tech, we are saving every day. We're just absolutely saving every day because we're doing changes that we do want to save. Once the show is open, I'm running with auto update on, but I am not saving my show at the end of the day, because throughout the course of the show, the live show that the audience is paying for, I am making fader changes, things that are not necessarily going to translate to tomorrow's show. So I don't want to save that. But what I do want to save is the new EQ that I've dialed in on, let's say, a new swing who's gone on in a part for the first time. So I write it down on a piece of paper, and then the next day at my preset, I create a player for it, and I look at my piece of paper and I dial it in, and that's what I do.
Nothing wrong with a bit of paper.
And I know other engineers who do the whole, and everything in between, right? Some engineers save every day regardless. And a lot of them do have a middle ground where they don't save at the end of the night unless they did something they think is worth saving, and then they'll save a new session. So I think there's a whole spectrum up there of those options.
Does there come a point when you revisit some of these old productions where the mix has been left to it, and you look at the session and go, that's not what I did, because they've been tweaking and making changes? Or are you fine with that? I mean, that's just part of the the organic process of a production. I mean,
I think it varies. I was gonna say, I think it varies, right? I mean, there's some changes you absolutely would hope an engineer would make, and then there's some changes where you'd hope maybe they wouldn't touch something. And part of the conversation during production is, here are the things you have full reign over. We obviously want to empower engineers to make the show sound as good as it can possibly sound. The flip side is some of the choices we made early on, either in production or in production for the very first production of that show, were made with something in mind that the engineer may not know. So I think it's just an important conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, always have conversations, always talk to people, because that's, that's how the lack of communication, traditionally in our world from live between front of house and monitors, but, between, mixers and associates and designers who all have this sort of slightly different role, but are trying to achieve the same thing at the end of the day.
And one of the things that I found, especially for tours, in terms of saving, is if you really make sure that you save a new session when you get to a new city, and when you get to the next city, create a new session there. Because if something does happen and you have to call me on the phone and we're going through what's going on, it's really nice to be able to go back and look at the session from the previous city and see what happened. Having a previous instant, okay, it's not working now, it was working then, let's look at it then. So just overwriting the same file over and over again, I would recommend not doing, because having that library, having the history of session files, and seeing how that workflow can create over time, when something does go sideways, is really helpful for me to be able to go and look at where it was, where it was working versus now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's been one more question. Chris Bogg is asking me to talk about relative groups. There's another one coming in. Relative groups for auto update. Chris, I think I'm actually gonna maybe next week make a specific video from this. It's quite an involved thing to demonstrate, and rather than 8 o'clock on a Friday night here, make a mess of it. Probably more useful if I make a proper video for it, and we'll post it up on YouTube, and you hopefully can go and find it there. A question from Joe. Excuse me while I read this. How do you guys go about maintaining show integrity from a tour standpoint and a fixed show, Broadway or West End? Is your personal process as simple as using your ears, or do you guys look at certain parameters or levels as a bookmark for a show?
Jace, do you want to? I mean, Jason's job. Yeah. I'm willing to. I mean, I think I'll say this, and then I really want to hear what Jason has to say about it. My feeling about it has always been, and I've expressed this to everybody who's. I think Julie's heard it from me, because we originated Tina in the West End before we did it on Broadway, where Julie's doing it, and we've done Tina twice since, and there's multiple Hamilton companies and multiple Dear Evan Hansons, and my personal philosophy about this is that what we're trying to do is capture the spirit of the original thing, right? Like a show will not sound the same in a different venue with a different company and a different cast. It can't in different architecture. It just won't. But if it feels the same, if it feels like it sounds the same, if it captures the spirit of the thing, then that's what's most important to me. And there's two things about that that are good to keep in mind. One is you are powerless in the face of the architecture and the company and the band. Like those are things you don't have control over, and they are ultimately going to make the thing sound the way it's going to sound. And it also empowers your engineers and your associates to make good decisions about how to deal with the challenges they encounter in all these places, people, and things. And so that's sort of my take on it. Jason is charged with actually maintaining a lot of these things, and he can speak more specifically to it.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that often when you're turning an original company into new productions, there's also technology changes. So the equipment that's sitting on Hamilton on Broadway is very different than the equipment that's going out on tour for Hamilton. And as a result, the idea that it's going to sound exactly the same in a new venue with new equipment is basically impossible. So, I mean, I would go back to what Nevin said about trying to get the experience feeling the same. There are certainly technical tools we use to establish baselines. We look at traces, we tune the room, we're running smart a lot of the time, particularly useful when moving a tour between venues, when we know the equipment is the same and all we're trying to compensate for is a new venue. That actually, we can get more analytical with that simply because there are fewer variables, but the variable of turning an existing sound system into a new sound system in a new venue, we rely much more on our ears than the actual, I think, measurement tools to make it sound identical.
Very cool. Interesting. There are no more questions at the moment, so either people don't have questions or Molly in the background has done a fantastic job answering them. Anything you guys want to add, about either theatre world or sound or what you're doing at the moment, with lockdown and your hopes for us coming back to work in the next weeks, months? How's it looking out there?
Yeah.
At the moment, we're waiting for more data. I had theories about this back when the pandemic broke all over the world and everything slowly or quickly shut down. And I had ideas about what the timeline was going to look like. And, they've been blown up since then. And it's disheartening. We like to work. I mean, I was busy and needed a break and I got one, but now, frankly, I'd like to get back to work. I still enjoy it. And I miss this is a great simulation of being with my team and talking about audio. I mean, it's great to see Julie and Jason and chat about these things because that's actually one of my favorite parts about what I do. But it's not the same as attacking a problem and kind of getting in there and having a good time with our pals making new shows. And that's actually what I'd really like to be doing.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to be going back to our normal day jobs a little bit. Yeah. Well, listen, I'm going to thank you again in a minute. But first of all, let's have a look at what's coming up over the next few days. So, Kyle, I think we've got some slides that will show us. Tomorrow night, Josh Lloyd, Britannia Row, how to build a session for an award show. He's done a lot of them, has a lot of experience. So that's something a bit different to our normal rock and roll locked up series. And then next Friday, in the same time as this slot, but next week, front house engineer Chris Raybold is going to be with Ryan and Kyle, and I might be there in the background answering questions. Bruno Mars, I think probably Kyle is his biggest thing at the moment he's been up to, but next week, come along and ask your questions. And I think we've got a slide here we're going to put up near the end about our QR code. So if you want to know that Q1, the Q1 data, how to do it, our user guide, some information on the theatre specific features. If you miss it on this, we're going to put this up on YouTube. Go back, watch it there, and then point your phone at your computer screen and wonders of science, you'll end up with these 3 very useful documents. So that's fantastic. So I just want to thank Nevin, Jason, and Julie again, and Zach for your time on this Friday. Very interesting. I hope we can do this again and, you know, pick apart some more bits and pieces with our world. That would be fun.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Very good. So just stay safe. Hopefully we'll all be back at work soon. But until then, keep learning, keep watching, and we'll see you all again soon. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye. Cheers now.
Bye.